So far throughout this section, we've talked about good techniques for sampling that are based on randomness and a bad technique for sampling not based on randomness that we called convenience sampling. Again, collecting a good sample is really important because it's the only way that we can really be confident that our sample, which isn't the entire population, is actually going to help us understand or represent what the entire population feels. So let's take a look here at examples number 4 and 5 to see how exactly we might feel about the samples collected within these different scenarios. So example 4. A study was conducted by researchers to try and determine the sleeping behavior of students who just recently graduated college in the US. The goal was to try to estimate the average number of hours of sleep that this kind of individual gets in a night. Now, 18,000 students were randomly selected from campuses across the country, such that at least 10 students were selected from each state. Each participant was asked to record the number of hours that they slept for each night for a period of 1 week. Okay. Now, when we come here to part A, just first off, what in the world is this question even about? What is the goal of the researcher? What is it that they're trying to find? And this is actually pretty easy to identify because notice right here it says the goal was to try and determine. Okay, so we really wanted to know what is the average number of hours of sleep a recent, a recent US college graduate gets? Recent college graduate gets per night, right? That was the idea. What is this average? Is it an average of 5 hours, an average of 10 hours, somewhere in between? What are we talking about? But when we talk about the way that this data was collected, we're talking about our sampling technique. So how was the data collected? What was the technique being used here? There were 18,000 students that were randomly selected. Okay, so we know it's not a convenience sample. It's got to be one of those other 4. It's either a simple random or a stratified or a cluster or a systematic. Now, there was the case that at least 10 students were selected from each state. Okay, so when I hear this, I start to go, interesting. So I'm grabbing 10 individuals from each of the different states. So there's kind of like, states are kind of like groups, right? Like there's 50 different groups here, and I'm selecting 1 or 10 people from each. So this sounds like a stratified sample. Well, if it's a stratified sample, meaning that it was done randomly, would it be reasonable to say trust the results of this study? At the very least, based off the way the data was collected. And I would say, in this case, absolutely yes. Now, we might have some problems with some of the results of the study based on other things, like maybe just say based off their interpretation of the data or something like that. But purely based off of the way the data was collected, this seems like this might help us get a reliable sample that's going to help us reflect what's actually true of all U.S. college graduates. So we would feel confident in this because the sample data, so put this here, the sample data was obtained randomly. So that's good. We like that. Now let's compare this to what's happening here in example number 5. Suppose here in this example, a hospital wants to better understand the experiences of their patients. So a director of client services reviews online comments that are made over the past 6 months, right? How do people comment about the hospital? How are things going? The director puts together a report of what she has found. Would it be reasonable to trust the results of her work based on the sample of data that was collected? So would it be reasonable to trust the results found by the director? Well, immediately I can see that if I go back to kind of, well, wait, what was the sampling technique here? Was the data randomly collected? Were the comments collected from a random sample of individuals who use the hospital? In this case, no, it was just made by online comments. It was collected from comments that were just kind of convenient to collect. This here represents a convenience sample. And so while some of those comments might be relevant, in fact, many of those comments might even represent true and accurate experiences, they still collectively might not represent the common experience for the entire group of people that have used this hospital. So here we would say no, this is not necessarily reliable sampling. So the data collected was not done randomly. And so as a result, we can't necessarily believe that what these comments are saying represents what the overall average patient, say, feels about this hospital. So if you notice here in example 5, that actually means that a lot of things that we typically rely on, like you think you might rely on Yelp to get ideas about what restaurants are good, or TripAdvisor to see what places you might want to go on a vacation, or Rate My Professor even for what professors are going to be good or bad. It doesn't mean that those sites are bad in that they provide lies. It just means that even though what's stated on there might be the true experiences of a few individuals, that doesn't necessarily tell you what all people that have attended those classes or those restaurants or those vacation spots feel. You're kind of getting a slanted view. You're not getting a representative view. So we always have to be careful about that.